Welcome to I Like Beer, the book talk, where we discuss great books while we drink a great beer. I'm your host, Jeff Spanier. With me, co-host of the I Like Beer, the podcast, Jeff Riccitelli.
All right, excited to be here. Finished book number 2.
It's exciting, huh?
Yeah, it's good. And actually, it was good to reread it. It's been a couple of years since I read it, so I was excited to reread it. It's always good to read what you would call some of the classics, I guess, or reread a classic. And I think it's also one of those ones where I'm pretty sure I read that in high school, but I don't know how much I read it in high school. So it's also good to read it. Yeah, how much I got out of it. So it's good to reread it now with a little different perspective and a chance to look back on it.
And also with us, co-host, author, voice behind Cheers North County, and Roast, Ryan Woldt.
Hey everybody, I'm also excited. I was reading this book, and it was my excuse to go back to the library the first time since the pandemic hit, so that was exciting. And I also realized about 40 pages into it that I had read it before, but it was probably in high school as well, so I just didn't remember.
Good. Well, Jeff and I bonded years ago over our fondness for craft beer and telling stories, and we met Ryan through our zeal for beer and quickly learned that we all three shared a passion, love of books. And out of this realization, these shared passions, we give you I Like Beer, the book talk. Once a month, we'll join our intellectual literary powers to discuss a book and share a beer. Who wrote this?
Nice.
We're supposed to read this before the book talk?
Yeah. Oh yeah, right. No, we're going to read the book to you while we drink.
Yes,
that's a whole new concept.
That's a great. That actually be a good that would be a good podcast.
That might be a better show.
It might be. I do like the fact that, what did you call us? Intellectual.
We're joining our intellectual literary powers.
I need to write that down so I can add that to my resume, because that's.
Well, between the three of us, we've got the intellectual powers of.
Yes.
Nearly a whole man.
Yeah, well-educated person.
We decided to rotate the host based on who has chosen the book, and tonight that's me, and the book is Ernest Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises. But before we turn the first page, let's find out what everyone's drinking and why. Talent, what do you got tonight?
Well, it's tough. I would say after reading the book again, they mentioned beer in there, but they don't talk a whole lot about beer. So, you'd probably be better off drinking wine, which, I'm not going to do, or something a little harder liquor. But so I decided to go into my beer fridge, and I'm going to start off with a Sublime because it's got a sun on it. And the sun also rises, so I figured that tied right into it. Plus, it's one of my favorite beers. So I'm doing AleSmith Sublime Mexican Lager. It's not a Spanish lager. I guess I should try and find some Spanish lagers. But it does have a sun on it, and the sun also rises.
All right. We only said it had to connect. We didn't have to say that we had to buy it. We just had to have one that you can convince yourself of.
Yes.
I like that you started strong with the intellectualism of this conversation.
Yes, that's true.
Well, it's got a sun on it.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's called symbolism, I believe, is the true term of that. It's
That's
a
right.
symbol. Yes.
There's a quote from Hemingway about symbolism, which I happen to have handy. And it is, there isn't any symbolism. The sea is the sea. The old man is an old man. The boy is a boy, and the fish is a fish. The shark are all sharks, no better and no worse. All the symbolism that people say is shit.
Right.
Just happen to have that one ready to go.
Yeah.
Although he bends over backwards to have Santiago carrying the mast of the sailboat like Christ hauling the cross up the hill. But no symbolism, believe me. No allegory, no metaphor. Trust me. That's Hemingway for you.
No, that's a great quote, because that's a quote that I probably wish I would have known when I was in high school, because that's what I thought when every time a teacher would assign a book like this book and then try to explain it to me. And I'm like, it's just a book. It's a story. It's a good, but how are you finding all this stuff? So,
Well,
I don't know.
Hemingway's the master to me of saying the least with the most amount of words. That was important to him at the time when people were diving into stream of consciousness and other ways of layering in depth. He was trying to cut it to the bone, which I think is another of his quotes about cutting off. There's no fat, there's no extra skin. It's just bone and muscle. So, what are you drinking, Ryan? Besides your quote delivering, what are you drinking?
Sure. So I thought about it. I was tempted to go towards a cocktail or some wine as well, and then I just thought, you know what, I want to go with a beer and something that's appropriate. So I have a Deschutes Obsidian Stout and the description is black skies, ominous flows, dark notions. And I feel like every character in this book is a terrible person with a dark.
Yes.
And so I thought this would be the beer that I would drink for this talk today to celebrate that darkness. The sun also rises, but before it rises, it gets real dark.
Right. Yeah, the title is ultimately optimistic.
Right.
But it also infers, although without any symbolism, Hemingway, sure, that we're coming out of the darkness for this. I've got a Firestone Walker Champs de phrase. I don't know how to pronounce it in French, but it's a Strawberry Fields.
Oh, sounds good.
And tapping into my inner count, this is a beer that I've had in my beer cellar, a barrel-aged vintage beer that I paid way more than I could tell my wife I spent on a single bottle of beer, and have been saving and wondering when I was going to drink this. And I was looking at the maturation time, and I'm almost to that 24 months that says, let this thing age for 24 months for maximum. And I thought, all right, this is the time. This is the book. These are the friends. This is the time and place for this beer. I have not tasted it yet, but I poured it because I'm letting the temperature get right. See, my inner count.
You're such a cultured drinker now.
I'm trying to be with this one.
Yes.
The first two I had before this, less cultured. All right. We discussed in our pilot episode how all three of us value rereading a book. And that was sort of my impetus for choosing Sun Also Rises. And it's a book that's special to me and a perfect beer for a drinking podcast. This is the book. So I'm sure we'll get into that at some point. Ryan, you had asked via Twitter about teaching this book and how does a teacher deal with some of these problematic issues. And I have taught it a number of times. When the class is right, when the chemistry of the class is right, this is a book I'll bring out. And context is everything to give both the students and the book a fair shake. So in my quick synopsis here, I'll try to give us, the listeners, first-time readers, some context for Hemingway's Sun Also Rises. Sound fair enough?
Fair enough.
Good.
Story of World War I expats who found their way to 1920s Paris. Number of tag-alongs that followed that trend of the cool kids hanging out in Paris. So we have these World War I vets, including our narrator, Jake Barnes, trying to figure things out. Ryan mentioned the blackness, the darkness they're in. They're dealing with some war trauma in the midst of what Hemingway called the movable feast in Paris, that party going on. And Jake, our narrator, like a number of characters, was injured in World War I. To me, at the heart of this book, and I think this book has a heart, I think it's a love story above all else, but it's a frustrated love story, frustrated with capital letters, frustrated. Jake was injured below the belt in the war, rendering him impotent. Lady Brett Ashley, his love, lost her true love in the war, and that's left her psychologically damaged, a nymphomaniac of sorts. Jake even quips at one point, I suppose she just wanted what she couldn't have, making a joke out of it. But the two are drawn irresistibly to each other, and there's not, as Brett says, a damn thing they can do about it. So there's this love story that's absolutely frustrated, that we know can't work. We know it can't work, but there's poor Jake trying to figure out if this thing can work, and we watch it unfold. The novel pretends to be about one Robert Cohn, Jake's friend, a writer, man who seems terribly uncomfortable in his own skin. But in my interpretation, the book's really about Jake, and in his defense mechanism tries to make it about Robert when it's really about himself. It is about broken people, as Ryan mentioned, that lost generation, lost people, broken people. That fascinates me. It draws me back to this book. I probably read this book about once every 3 years. It unfolds in 3 parts. We have Jake's life in Paris, working as a news correspondent by day, trying to keep up with the Paris nightlife after hours. And then we're off to Spain for a vacation, fishing, the fiesta, the bullfights in Pamplona. Jake's different friends of all sorts invite themselves along for the trip. And then the final part is this aftermath of that experience. And by aftermath, I mean the fallout of this group of friends. That if I say this phrase, worlds collide, does that mean anything to you guys?
Sure.
I think Jake's worlds collide. He has these different friendships of varying intimacy, and in the way he usually compartmentalizes his life, everyone gets along, but he doesn't mix these friend groups. And we see a summer where they all mix with too much booze, too much hot sun, too much passion, and we'll get to that. And I thought we'd take the book part by part, if that works for you guys, starting with Paris and Jake's issues and pretense that this is a story about Robert Cohn.
I think, yeah, I'm excited to break it down that way. And one thing I would say before we do that applies to the whole book, something that startled me even on this reread is how much the drama of the story, those things you're talking about, the drinking, the passion, the sex, how blunt Hemingway was with those topics when so many of our other visions of that time period are kind of filtered through this romantic lens.
Mm-hmm.
I think even in a lot of our popular culture, books are one of the few places that you really see like the stuff that kids are dealing with today. When we say kids are so much more advanced than they were, well, that may be true to a point, but there was still a lot of that then too. Our characters are in their late 20s, early 30s to mid 30s, and they're drinking too much and they're sleeping around and they're doing all these things that you might see on a sitcom today. It's not something I associate with that time period where I think about having proper diction and, wearing a tie to the bar,
right,
that sort of thing.
Right.
And
good moral values.
Yeah. Reading through it's really a reminder that in all time periods, people are dealing with problems and dealing with emotions and that was an interesting reminder, kind of considering what we're going through as a people now.
And sexual desire, Romeo and Juliet.
Sure.
We got 13 and 15-year-olds, craving each other's bodies. So the Victorians tried to button all that up, but it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. And I think that because it was set in France and in Spain, there was that more of an openness to discuss that type of behavior in a more honest way.
There's a lot, and I've read a lot about the writing of this book, both interviews with Hemingway and other scholars I've written about it. A lot that got edited out, a lot of the language, a lot of the graphic stuff that they were like, that won't fly in America. That won't be a published book by this firm, right? So cleaning up of language, but it's still there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I say when saying the most with the least amount of words, it's still there.
It's very true.
I don't know that I noticed it all the first time I read it, but as I reread, it's all there. Jake's issues, that when I teach the book, early on in the book, his anti-Semitism, his homophobia, those things just rage almost to the point of embarrassing to be teaching the book. And I tell the students, hold on, it's going to make sense. And when we get to his injury, his anti-Semitism is all just blasted at Robert, and we find out why he's so jealous of Robert. He's not so much anti-Semitic as that's a way to attack Robert.
He's anti-Robert, right?
Yeah. And the gay men that come in, we first meet Brett. She comes in with this group of flamboyantly gay men, and he wants to punch one of them. And we're like, what is his problem? Like, tolerance, man. And he even says, I know you're supposed to be tolerant. Yeah. And we find out about 3 pages later,
it's his own.
He's not angry that they're gay as much as he's angry that they're with Brett and they have functioning bodies and he doesn't.
No. It is really startling reading now the casualness of kind of the racial comments and some of the homophobia, and just thinking, well, you could never say that.
No.
And at the time they were saying it, and his characters were saying it as and taking stereotypes as fact, but it didn't also seem like any of them were actively acting on those comments, right? Like they were interacting with people of all different races and sexes and creeds, and it didn't seem to matter, but yet in their language. And that's something that as a country we still suffer with people who say one thing but act a different way.
Right.
And so that I thought was really interesting, that if you removed those things from the book, it would have been a different book. But either way, I wouldn't have thought that the characters' attitudes towards people changed in any way, regardless of who they were. If that makes sense.
It does. It does. And it's one of those things you can, when you read it with a 21st century lens, there's stuff that's troubling and even to the point of upsetting. When Bill Gorton shows up and he's talking about the American black boxer and using the N word over and over again, I find that repulsive. But in the story he's telling, the black boxer is the hero. He has sympathy and empathy, and he takes care of him. But he has this absolute casual, no guilt use of a dehumanizing term to describe him. Those are those things that, we're reading it 100 years later. And I don't want to justify the language, but I guess there's a way that you qualify that Bill Gorton's racist and still thought the black man in the story needed to be taken care of and had compassion for him. That those two things can somehow exist. They exist now. Right? That
they do. And I'm just, as we're going, I feel like I've steered us down this really abstract and deep path. So I don't want to get you too far away from diving into France either.
I think we've set this up that we just see where it goes. Yeah. I know for Jeff and I, that's our favorite part about talking about anything is let's see where this goes.
Let's see where this goes. So, well, here's the one thing for me. Like I said, I took it, like I said, I know, I read it back in high school. I did read it about, I don't know how many years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. The one thing I would say, again, for anyone who hasn't read it, it's actually a really easy read. Very simple language. Like you said, it's basic, but it says so much in it. So I found from that standpoint, like if someone that's looking to say, I want to read a classic or read one of some of our famous authors, this is a good place to start. And I think that it's a lot of dialogue and the character development is really good. You really get a feel for each of those characters, whether you like them or don't like them. You do get, you kind of see both sides of that for those characters. It's funny because I kind of reflect back on, and I'm sure probably the first time I read that, to me, it was very cool. The adventure, oh, how cool is this? These people hang out in France and then they go fishing in Spain. And then they're going to the Fiesta de San Fermin and they're going to the running of the bulls and that kind of stuff. And now it's interesting to read it again with a totally different lens and maybe just a little more insight after having lived a few more years. And you read all that, but you really kind of see that that's all just kind of superficial. And it's actually really sad in a way that they're just kind of, masking kind of those difficulties that they've had or the difficulties they have and that their lives are really kind of lonely, sad and lonely. And so it's a totally different perspective.
Which is why they're drinking so much.
Exactly. And they're just using that alcohol to mask and hide. Whereas
unlike us, that we drink it to celebrate.
Yeah, we just have fun and to celebrate and read the book. But it's just, it's really interesting, like I said, to read it multiple times at different parts in your life or where you are and what you take out of that. And so that's what I felt it was kind of, it's an interesting read and it was good to kind of go back and reread it again. And again, kind of looking through a different lens there.
Yeah, the language, the dialogue is really kind of Aaron Sorkin-esque. Like, let's walk and talk. And, it's very like we're sitting and talking, then we're going to walk and we're going to talk. And it's really just a whole book about conversations.
Yeah. And there are multiple places where they are literally doing that. They're walking and talking. And they'll say, and Hemingway will put in one of those things, we turned a corner. And which he means, of course, literally the characters turned a corner. And then the conversation will take this slap you in the face. The one that stands out to me is when Brett tells Jake that she slept with Robert Cohn, basically because she was bored and felt sorry for him.
Right.
And, Jake he pines for her. They have this frustrated love. He's already annoyed with Robert for a number of reasons, but he finds out that, Brett and him slipped off for a week together because she was bored and felt sorry for him. And I think it even says the sentence is, we turned a corner, right? Their relationship can't be the same. Those are the things where Hemingway that's not symbolism, but if he's acting like there's no nuance or subtlety to his writing, he's not being honest. That first description of Brett, my vision of that has not changed since I was a teenager and first read that. The curves like the hull of a racing yacht, and you could see all of it through that sweater. I have no idea what that means, but I picture it perfectly.
Yeah, no, I wrote that down as far as probably one of my favorite quotes. And I actually, as I was reading it, I wrote that down, and then I actually pulled it up again. Was the exact quote. She was built with curves like the hull of a racing yacht, and you miss none of it with that wool jersey. And it's like, I don't think it matters what time you're reading that. You totally can visualize that.
And I have no idea what the hull of a racing yacht looks
Me
like,
neither.
but I know what that means. And it's a shallow,
yes,
juvenile, masculine way of describing a woman's body. And then he'll follow that up. And this is one of the reasons why I keep standing up for Hemingway when I have friends and loved ones who sometimes tear him down. He follows that up with a description of her eyes when they're in the cab, that they go from being flat and empty to having this great depth where she understands everything in the world and him. And as the lights change just on the taxi drive, he can see her eyes and her in her face, that shift. And as you get to know Brett, she's both those things. She's this putting on these airs, putting on this, in her own way, masculine, I'm an independent woman, I'm in charge of me, myself, my body. And then this vulnerability and brokenness. And we get both of that. And to me, that's what real people are like. They live their life with we all have to live our life with a certain, I won't say masquerade, but a certain level of strength about us. And a certain level of depth that we don't go sharing with everyone.
Well, I think that's sharing with everyone is the phrase that I would point to there, which is that there's the person I am when I'm alone. There's the person I am when I'm with the people closest to me, like my wife or my parents, even though that's a different. And then there's the person I am with people I meet on the street or work acquaintances or friends. And those are all different people that are somehow the same person. And with Brett, she's only letting what seems like a very small, tiny bit of herself out with most people in the world. And for whatever reason, with Jake, she's letting out more.
Jake's become her confidant, and he does not want to be her confidant.
No.
Because if you're Brett's confidant, that means she's going to confide in you all the love affairs she's having,
right?
Which is the last thing Jake wants to hear in his frustration. Those moments where Jake's alone, trying to get Brett out of his mind, and in that first part of the book in Paris, where he tries to go to bed, he's been drinking, he's been dancing, he's been kissing Brett because he has all the sexual desires of a man. Hemingway made that clear in his biography with Hotchner, but he has all the desires of a man. And then he's trying to go to sleep, sexually frustrated, and he has to drink, and he has to read the papers, and he reads us his mail. Of all the things to put in a book, the guy reading us his mail because he's trying to get Brett out of his mind. And just as he falls asleep, who shows up banging on the door? Brett, to give him a few kisses so that he's never going to go back to sleep.
Yeah,
I feel like that's a perfect description of what the last 2 months of my life have been like, where I'm trying to get politics out of my mind, and then I'm watching sitcoms on Netflix. Yeah. And then just as I'm about to fall asleep, I flick onto Twitter and somebody said something, and I lose it again.
Yeah, that's a good call.
So, the political process is my Brett right now.
Wow. This is what I was talking about. What did I say at the beginning? Intellectual genius, intellectual powers, literary powers. This is what I'm talking about. And this is why Ryan is a mandatory part of the show.
That's true. I'll take it down a few notches because I read it and I basically, to the vernacular of today's youth, ultimate friend zone. That's what I basically wrote down. Is Jake is the ultimate friend zone.
Yes.
So if you want to understand his relationship with that, he was put in the ultimate friend zone.
Do you think that Jake, I mean, we know that it makes him miserable, but he also knows that it's as close as he's going to ever get.
So
it's like a tooth that's loose and you keep pushing on it.
Right. It's one of those things. It's like that pleasure and pain, right? It hurts him, but he also gets his pleasure out of it as well. So, and I think that's true of the friend zone a lot of times, is most people know where they are and when they're in it, but they find it hard to do it. You know, it's like that addiction to her, you know, being with her and talking with her and also getting that affection from her. I think it's and it carries through the entire book.
There's a part, I'm going to read some of the dialogue here where Brett and Jake are trying to talk out some of this past. He says, it's funny. It's very funny. It's a lot of fun too, to be in love. And Brett answers, do you think so? Her eyes looked flat again. I don't mean fun that way. In a way, it's an enjoyable feeling. No, she said. I think it's hell on earth. It's good to see each other. No, I don't think it is. Don't you want to? I have to. And then at one point, he says, isn't there anything we can do about it? and she says, I don't want to go through that hell again. And those two lines, isn't there anything we can do about it? I don't want to go through all that hell again, tells you, if you're in the mind to get in bed with these two and say, aren't there some ways they could fix this? Aren't there a couple things I can picture a couple things they might try? That line of, I don't want to go through that hell. He's like, they've already tried everything you can think of.
Well, that kind of makes me think, though, too, that for him, he can't get past this idea that his masculinity and his inabilities as a man are what is holding this relationship back. And for her, what's holding it back is the fact that she was in love once and he died and it didn't work out. And now, as much as she feels strongly for Jacob, she would rather distract herself with anything else than have that emotional tear happen to her again.
And of course, that's going to all be challenged when we get to part 2 here. But before we finish part 1, thoughts on the Count, which is a character, every time I read it, I love the Count. I don't know if there's a way for me to read this book without just loving the Count.
Well, the Count has one of my favorite lines in the book, where they are in a conversation between the Count and Brett and Jacob up in Jacob's room, where he's getting champagne from his driver, and the Count is talking to Brett about a title, about having titles, and at the time how titles, whether it was lady or count or whatever, would have been important, and he was kind of dismissing that, saying to her that you don't need a title, you got class all over you, which feels like both a compliment and an insult all at once.
Right. And he has because unlike every other man we meet in the story, except perhaps when we get to the bullfighter at the end, he finds her exceptionally attractive, but she has no power over him.
Right.
He's under no illusion. He's not getting in bed with her. That's not what he wants out of the relationship. Yeah. He even says that when they're dancing. She goes, "You want to dance, Count?" He goes, "No, I want to watch you dance."
Well, and that's what I was saying. I feel like the Count, when we talked about earlier a little bit about this, this generation that they're escaping so much by doing this, going out every night and dancing. He seems like the one guy that's actually just doing it because it's fun and he wants to do it. He's not, he's the one who's doing it for I wouldn't say the right reasons, but he's doing it because that's strictly that he's having fun.
And he said he's identified his values.
Yeah.
He does a little lecture to them about you need to identify your values, and whether it's the oldest brandy or antiquities he buys, he's identified what's important to him, and he just lives for that.
I feel like it's easier to identify those values when you have the money the Count has.
True.
Right.
That's very true.
I could be wrong in that because I've never been in that situation quite yet, although I'm expecting it soon.
Yes, soon.
But he does have the war injuries. He has that scene where he pulls up his shirt to show them, I've had bullet wounds and I have arrow wounds.
Yeah,
and
arrow
wounds.
Yeah.
So they went straight through. Look at the scars. So he has been where they are, assuming he's fought in war and he's been injured by war, and he's where they want to be, need to be.
Right.
I don't know if they know how to be there, but I guess he serves as some sort of model of it's possible.
Yeah. Like the evolution of it, right? Like this is knowing what you like and then working on what you like, as opposed to masking and hiding from you're trying to escape from.
We get a lot of Robert Cohn in that first part, and he's the kind of guy that walks into, there's even a line where it says, Robert walks in the room and Jake says, and I really shouldn't quote from memory because it means you always get a couple words wrong, but "Hi, Robert, you here to cheer me up?" Because, and that's laughable because Robert's never cheered up a room he's walked into. But Robert has his split with his fiance, has his affair with Brett, unbeknown to Jake. And that leads us into part 2, where Jake has planned a fishing trip with his American compatriot friend, Bill Gordon, who has he's traveling around Europe, and they have organized this fishing trip and to go to the bullfights. Robert invites himself. Brett and her fiance, she's still married to Lord Ashley, but she also has a fiance while she's sleeping with Robert, while she's in love with Jake. They invite themselves, and we're off to Spain, the whole gang, although not at the same time. Tell me what thoughts on that second part of the book.
Well, I think for me, Robert Cohen looks like a young Dustin Hoffman.
Okay.
That's probably a good call. Yeah, I can see that.
Maybe a young De Niro, but because of the boxing thing. But
yes. Yeah.
For some reason, when I read it, I was picturing Dustin Hoffman from The Graduate.
Interesting. because I picture him totally as Matthew Modine.
Oh,
that's another. Yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yeah, it's
A little taller, slimmer, but that sinewy, muscly.
Yeah.
Nobody under a certain age knows who Matthew Modine is, though.
Yeah.
That 100% true. That's what Google's for.
That is very true. I personally thought that the second part felt like it could be two parts, really, to me. The bullfight part and the pre-bullfight part. It
Yes.
could have been broken up one more time, but he didn't do that.
Which is also the peaceful, calm, and then the storm.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The fishing, the hiking.
Yeah.
Bill and Jake alone, they're very comfortable together. And then the whole gang back together and hell breaking loose.
So I'd say, first of all, as I transitioned to Spain, I switched to Tierra Madre because it's in Spanish, lager, just so I can stay. Oh, yeah, good for you. You got one as well. So I figured that was a good way to go. So I'm transitioning. Even though it is a Mexican lager, it is Tierra Madre, which really, I guess Spain would be Tierra Madre for a lot of Latin America. No, I thought that a couple of things on that. I did feel like a lot more of that. You get a feel for Robert Cohn in the first part. The one is where you really start to kind of not like the guy. And there's so many great quotes about it. Like I wrote down a couple. Like there's like when they first all come back together, and he says something like, "Brett was happy. Mike had a way of getting an intensity of feeling into shaking hands, and Robert Cohn just shook hands because we're back." It's like just all these things. Like he's just there. He's kind of that was where I got to like I think Mike made a quote to him about is I would have thought you'd love steer. They lead such a quiet life. They never say anything, and they're always hanging out about. So, and that was totally a direct one at Robert. Like, what are you doing here, man? So I thought that kind of very interesting.
Jake says Cohn had a wonderful quality of bringing out the worst in anybody.
Yeah, things like that. So that's where you really got to find out what people thought about Robert Cohn. So I thought really interesting. And then I also thought the other part that became, and again we go back to the symbolism, but I thought that I really enjoyed all the stuff of, and that whole thing, because I think that's for a lot of people, that's what they probably don't even realize that, but the big part that we all know about that is the running of the bulls. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably on a lot of people's bucket list at some point to go see that or do something with that. So it's kind of cool to see that and understand that, hey, that's been going on forever. But I think it also, that gets into that, we talked about just that machismo, the masculinity, like the importance of being masculine. And I think in their eyes that there was nothing more masculine than being a bullfighter, right? And the running of the bulls. And so again, you talk about symbolism. I think those, that was one area that to me jumped out, where the bulls and the bulls
and the steers, which are, the castrated.
Yeah. Which one are you? Yeah, exactly. That kind of a thing. So,
and anytime the masculinity in this book, and this is something my wife and I talk about with this book, because she's like, oh, Hemingway and all the machismo, you have to remember that all the machismo in the end, our hero is impotent.
Yeah.
It's all counterbalanced with the fact that one of his friend's wives back in Paris tried to set him up with a homosexual man because she just assumed he's gay, and his closest friends know he's impotent. So all that machismo gets balanced that way.
Right. Counterbalance. Yeah, exactly.
The fishing trip I really enjoyed on this reread. I usually want to read quickly and get to the bullfights.
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed.
You wanted to be on a fishing trip, or for some other reason?
I don't know. I just found the peacefulness of it, the hiking with the wine bottles and putting them in the creek, and figuring out where in the river are we going to fish. The river looked trouty, and taking the nap on the shore. And even that night when it gets cold, and they ask for the price of the hotel, and they're like, God, that's too much. And they say, is wine included? And she's like, sure, wine's included. And they said something like, we did not lose money. The idea of being with a good buddy.
Right.
No worry. Brett's gone. That frustration's out of there. Cohen's not there. That frustration's removed. And they just get to be two pals. Bill can be obnoxious, but he's obnoxious with Jake in a way that works. I think he even makes a knock on his impotence, and he's like, sorry. He's like, it's fine.
Yeah, it's the kind of they talk as if they're friends in that way, where you might say something inappropriate, but the other one doesn't take it personally.
which can't happen once Robert's back in the story.
No, but I think that you mentioned, Robert being around and Robert being unlikable. I think I started to unlike Robert during the time of the book when he wasn't around.
Right.
Because Bill and Jacob keep talking about him in these negative ways.
Right.
How they didn't like the way he was being with Brett, or they didn't like this or that or the other. And even
being
though
superior,
he wasn't there to defend himself, I was like, God, this guy's so annoying. Like, I don't want to deal with him. But he wasn't even actually doing anything. It was just their reflection and their negativity towards him, which I thought that's kind of something I pulled from that later.
Which is crazy when you remember that in normal life in Paris, Jake and Robert are friends. And Robert even says, you're the best friend I've got. And Jake says, God, sorry. Like, how depressing was that to hear? I'm the best friend you got. You should have heard the stuff I was writing about you a couple of pages ago,
But Robert kind of feels like that friend who's like your friend, and then he gets into this relationship and he becomes kind of a different person while he's in the relationship. And I think I think a lot of people know somebody like that or have somebody like that. I have a very close friend who in college started dating someone, and none of us understood it. Their relationship just didn't make sense to us, and he seemed like a different person, and they've been married for 17 years now, so it worked out. But I think that there was like a time where he was our closest friend, but we were just so annoyed with the way he was during that thing. And that could have been a reflection on ourselves, whether we were jealous of it or whether we just weren't mature enough to understand it or whatever it was. Robert Cohn kind of feels like that to me in this book, where maybe they had been friends for a period of time or they were close in Paris. But now all of a sudden he's hung up on this Brett, and all of those little annoying things that you normally just overlook just become amplified.
Yes.
Because Jacob's looking at him through this lens of like, well, he actually can do this thing that I want to be doing with Brett. And everyone else is looking at him as like, why is he so hung up on this girl? Why is he being so, leery and annoying and just around all the time when he might not have normally been?
Which, of course, at this time, once we're in Spain, Brett is joined by her fiance, Mike Campbell. So it's really a place where Robert should recognize this isn't okay for me to be here. I'm butting in, but he's still following. He's at her hip side at every moment. Any chance he can, he's cornering her off to talk to her. Mike Campbell, who's not a good drunk. No. He's not a well-behaved drunk. Has had enough. He knows what's happened. There's no secrets with Brett. She tells everybody everything. So, or at least enough. So we mix that with Mike Campbell's frustration with him and over drinking. And then we know the fights are coming. They're coming. It boils. Right. The pace of the boiling up of that fight, I really enjoyed. Because I already know it's coming. I've read the book before, but to see how that's measured out, snide remarks turn into snips, to turn into almost a fight, to we know a fight's coming.
With Robert and Mike and Jake, there's kind of an interesting interplay though too, where Robert is sticking around even though it seems like he knows he probably shouldn't, and everyone knows he shouldn't be there. But it's because part of him believes that there is a chance that Brett could end whatever she has going somewhere else to go off with him, and he can't let go of that hope.
Right.
And that makes Jacob angrier because Brett actually does open up to him in a way that she doesn't with Robert Cohn, and he knows that she'll never do that. And so he knows the end. He already knows Robert Cohn's ending in that relationship.
Yes.
And there's nothing he can do about it, even though he I think in his mind, he kind of believes or realizes that if he weren't in the position he were physically, he could see himself being Robert Cohn if the situation was reversed. Like if Brett didn't feel the way she did about him, then in that situation, he can see a world in which he's infatuated and couldn't let it go. And that makes him look at Robert Cohn with this kind of irritation and hatred because I could be you.
He says, why I felt the impulse to devil him, I do not know. And period. Of course, I do know. I was blind, unforgivingly jealous of what had happened to him. The fact that I took it as a matter of course did not alter that any. I certainly did hate him. I do not think I ever really hated him until he had that little spell of superiority at lunch. So I read what you just said right into those lines of I don't know why I hated it. Yes, I do know why I hated him. And then I was unforgiving, jealous, and then realizing this is how it works if you're going to be in love with Brett. And I could be on any end of this.
Mm-hmm.
Good call.
Thank you.
So we have our bulls. Certain of our characters have identified themselves as the bulls in life. They take charge. And we have our steers, which I always think is a fun little irony that Jake has identified himself as a bull, the man who's impotent. And Mike has no hesitation to let Robert Cohn know he's a steer in this relationship. Right. He's the one that doesn't belong. He doesn't live life to the full. He falls asleep on the first day. It's a 7-day party, and he falls asleep on day 1. But then we introduce a bullfighter, and we see Brett, probably for the first time in years, change. What did you guys think of old Pedro Romero, young Pedro Romero, I should say?
Well, my big one, like the other one quote I wrote, and I think that's, again, going back to that Machimo and that kind of the ideal male stereotypes movie, or in the end, is, the quote from Jake to Robert was, hey, nobody ever lives their life all the way up except bullfighters. And so I think that's where it's kind of interesting, because I think for most of us here, we wouldn't equate that to that, because bullfighting is not something that we hold near and dear nowadays. That is the example of what the ultimate male is a bullfighter. I thought that was and he plays it well.
And he's 19.
It's true.
He's 19, and he's more of a man than any of them, and that's determined in Hemingway style by the fact that he's a bullfighter, and 2, that he conquers Brett.
Right.
Well, and also he's young, and he's a new bullfighter, and he's very talented. But these older fans that are watching him don't quite understand or appreciate the skills that he has just yet, which I think happens a lot now with professional sports. Maybe
true. Yeah.
Don't quite understand things.
Let's see what you got.
And in the book, there's a couple of fans in the stands watching him bullfight, and they say, "What's he afraid of the bull for? The bull's so dumb, he only goes after the cloth. He's just a young bullfighter. He hasn't learned it yet. But I thought he was fine with the cape before. He's probably he's nervous now. But in reality, what's happening out in the bull ring is this intricately choreographed and talented dance that just the ignorance of the fans don't quite understand. But Jake, who's listening, does understand, and it's treated as a fact that this young person has a skill set that most bullfighters may not achieve, and most people in the audience won't understand, but it still makes him more of a man, more of a bull than any one of them that are watching. Yes. And it kind of takes over. He doesn't feel the same way towards the bullfighter in the end as he did towards Robert Cohen, even though he has a relationship with the bullfighter, because he can appreciate the talent and skill that he has.
Right.
He's jealous.
He can see why she went after him.
Right.
And really, he orchestrates, he being Jake, he orchestrates that relationship.
Right. He introduces them.
Brett says, she pretty much tells him, you're going to introduce me to this bullfighter, and his friend Montoya, who does not want the bullfighter Pedro Romero messed with by these outsiders. And Jake has pretty much promised him that will not happen, breaks all of his social, code of honor, and sets Brett up with the bullfighter. And I think, to his surprise, though, she falls madly in love. This isn't one of her usual flings where she sleeps with someone for a day or two and decides, all right, I'm not bored anymore, I can go about. She even says multiple times, I'm a goner, I'm mad about him, and he takes her away. He takes her away from the group, which Mike her fiance isn't real happy about.
No.
And that gets us to our fist fight. We take the bullfighter out, and we do have some throwdown. Well, I guess we have our bullfighter in a fist fight. Robert Cohn has a fist fight too. Robert Cohn has his breakdown. He's been taunted and mocked and ignored, and he's going to come in and save the damn. In his mind, this is how I think Robert Cohn. You tell me if you see it differently. I think Robert Cohn sees himself as the knight in shining armor. Brett needs saving, and I'm just the guy to do it.
Pretty much.
And he has throwdown with Pedro Romero, the 19-year-old. So this man who was a middleweight boxing champion, Robert Cohen. He knows how to use his fists. Has a fight with a 19-year-old and beats the snot out of him.
Right, but he has that fight in the hotel room that she is staying in with the young bullfighter.
Right.
So his illusion is so much that he has to go into the room where she's having an affair with this young bullfighter to save her, despite the fact that she clearly wants to be there in the story.
And he beats Pedro Romero to his face, looks like ground beef. I think it even said something similar to that, where Romero can barely stand up. But the point is, I think, in Hemingway terms, is Romero keeps
coming back. Yeah, exactly.
And in the end, Robert Cohen is crying and begging Romero to forgive him
and to stop getting up.
And Cohen gives up. The other guy never landed a punch, I don't think, unless there was one at the end. But Cohen loses that fight because he's the one crying, he's the one ashamed, and he breaks down, and the bullfighter continues to stand one more time. And very Cool Hand Lukish.
Yeah.
Well, there's an appreciation, I think, people have, and maybe men more in particular, for somebody who's clearly ill at odds in whatever situation they are and keeps fighting for it. Whether it's like I've been watching the show on endurance racing, and people who are clearly out of their element, or the race is beating them and they just keep pushing forward, or a football team that keeps playing even though they're losing by 5 touchdowns. And I'm remembering those moments from my own life as a kid where you just, we teach kids, I think, that never giving up is a virtue, as opposed to, well, sometimes it might be the smart thing to do to give up. But as outsiders, even if it might be the smart thing, we can still appreciate the fact that someone has something in them that keeps them moving forward, even in the face of insurmountable odds.
I think it's a very respectable trait, right? And I think we've all kind of been brought up to appreciate that.
The Rocky, right?
Yes.
The Rocky story, right?
Yeah.
So many incredible things happen in that Spain with the wine drinking but I know we want to be respectful of our time here.
I do want to know where I can get one of those leather wine
bags.
Wine bags. Those sound fantastic.
I did write a note I wanted to read to you guys about just about all the drinking in the story, because we really haven't talked about the drinking much at all. But I actually wrote down the drinking. By God, the drinking.
Yeah. No, there's no doubt about it. Yeah.
Have they never heard of liquor before beer? You're in the clear, because they just go from Pernod to wine to beer,
right,
whatever, and it's a nonstop a thing. And I think that there was a time in my life where I drank like that, but it was in my early 20s, certainly not in my early 30s.
No.
Or mid 30s. And so it was a really incredible thing to read. And then the second part of that was, despite the fact that I think he has like $2,500 to his name to last him for the rest of the
right.
It's
that
very
doesn't
cheap.
seem to be a problem, and he's traveling through Paris and Spain. I thought, man, that's a good life there.
That the 7-day party, the quote says, the fiesta was really started. It kept up day and night for 7 days. The dancing kept up, the drinking kept up, the noise went on. The things that happened could only have happened during a fiesta. Everything became quite unreal finally, and it seemed as though nothing could have any consequences. It seemed out of place to think of consequences during the fiesta. All during the fiesta, you had the feeling, even when it was quiet, that you had to shout any remark to make it heard. It was the same feeling about any action. It was a fiesta, and it went on for 7 days.
Sounds like the definition of a fiesta. That should be the definition.
Right. And there's almost no detail in there, right?
Yeah,
there's almost no adjectives or details, but I get the pace, the feel of that.
Right.
Buckle up, kiddos. Yeah. We're going to drink, we're going to dance, we're going to scream, and it's going for 7 days.
To echo Ryan's thing, I agree. There's no social drinking here. They're not drinking to enjoy. It was one of those things. It wasn't a matter of enjoying the beverage. It was how much can we get and how quickly. And if we can't get that, let's get something else. Let's drink this. Let's drink this. And it really, again, I think it kind of goes back to that escaping and just drinking to be kind of obliterated, really, is where they were going.
Which is against what the Count taught them at the beginning.
Exactly.
The Count says,
drink to enjoy it.
He goes across town. He has to get it to the right temperature. And Brett wants to drink it. And he says, this is sipping champagne. And it says Brett's glass was empty.
Yeah.
And then the Count says, drink this one slowly, and then you can get drunk, my dear.
Right.
Or something to that effect. And they've thrown out the lessons that the Count tried to give them. And the end of the book, is there any personal growth? Is there any learning curve for him? Is he better off at the end in part 3? That's the part that I come back to, and I can read it with different lenses and feel different ways about it. We have the aftermath. Pedro Romero takes Brett away. Robert Cohn goes home after the fight, after he punches out Jake, and some other things happen. So he's gone, and Campbell gets sent on his goodbye. Bill Gordon's going on with the rest of his trip, and Jake alone has these series of baptisms where he goes swimming and he goes sunning, and he's trying to process and reflect on all of this.
Isn't it like one of those things where he's starting to have this growth or this path, and then, like I talked about, the friend zone, he just gets drawn back into the friend zone?
We're really getting this feeling of, I see how this works. He's going to be all better, and then he gets like 5 telegrams in a row.
The telegram, and it's like, I'm going to run back and help out. Yeah.
I'm in terrible trouble. Come find me. Find me, from Brett. And you kind of, I don't know how you felt, but I kind of hope Jake would just say, not this time, dear. You're on your, but no, he goes to get her.
Yeah.
And they have the walk and talk that Ryan talks about. They have a taxi drive talk, and then they have a walk and talk.
Just
that
that
they
circle.
try to sort some of this out. Yeah. And that ending, the famous last line is Brett says, "Oh, Jake, we could have had such a damn good time together." And Jake's response is, "Isn't it pretty to think so?" Which I suppose you can read in a number of different ways. I'm in a hopeful, because the title is Sun Also Rises. I kind of hope that's Jake saying, that's an illusion I once lived by.
Right. But it's also kind of sad, because I think it's also that he's kind of that realization that it's never going to happen too. So, but he can't get himself out of there. Yeah, I guess it can be sad and positive. I agree. Hey, the sun also rises.
It's a moving forward.
Yeah, no, like I said, I think that's I mean, he's there. I think if it was made a movie, the right ending on that would have been he would have just kind of crumpled up the telegram and thrown it away and gone back his way. But I think real life is the way it really ended.
We film it like a movie. What we see between those lines, we could have had such a damn good time together, is a policeman, a man in uniform, raising his baton upward.
Yeah. And
Jake looking out across the street and seeing a man in uniform with his baton raised.
Right. And there you go.
I know there's no symbolism. That's not a phallic symbol at all.
No.
And Jake's slow response, isn't it pretty to think so?
Right.
With some acceptance.
If it were in a movie, that would have been like the end of Lost in Translations, where we never actually hear that line. It's whispered.
Oh, right.
Yeah. We never hear it.
Yeah.
So those last lines are quite famous, but this time I was really drawn to Brett's kind of last, is this an epiphany or not? When Brett says right before that, when she decides that she's not going to ruin Pedro Romero, that Pedro Romero wants to marry her, but she knows she's 35 or 36 and he's 19, and this is not going to be good. Even though she loves him, she's got to do a selfless thing and let him go, which is not her thing, doing selfless things for people. But she says, it makes one feel rather good deciding not to be a bitch. It's sort of what we have instead of God.
Well, it feels like she's acknowledging. It feels like she's just out and out acknowledging in a more real way than previously how broken she is emotionally. That she was in love with him, but maybe more infatuated, and he was in love with her, and she knew that she could only give him so much, because she had already given up so much in her previous life. And book 3 starts with the phrase, "In the morning it was all over." And I think it was almost like you could have just finished the book right there. But but I think they all have kind of their own ending in the book. The end of the fiesta, which is, I think, something we can all, like, the day after a party, nothing looks the same in wherever you are. Or I was in New York after the Giants won the Super Bowl, but I didn't go to the Super Bowl parade, but I was down there the next day. And it was just this, wasteland of confetti and newspapers and everything. And the fiesta, I imagine, would be something similar. But for Jake, in the morning, it was all over, and all of this has changed, and now he's going off on his own. And you could have ended that story there. Hemingway could have, but he brought Brett back into it to kind of show that, like, that life doesn't just end on a certain note. It's kind of this bumpy up and down, I thought, ride. And Jake's ending and Brett's ending, their timing may not align. I mean, we talk a lot about in life about timing of relationships, but you know, she and Romero's relationship ended a certain way, and Brett and Jake's relationship ended a certain way. And now there's this continuation, and who knows what the next step will be for them both.
Well said.
I like to think, you were saying you wish you would have thrown that telegram away. I like to think him going to get her is like his kind of way of saying goodbye.
Maybe, yeah. Well, I feel like that's a more, well, I said that him throwing the telegram away would be the movie ending. Real world ending is you're going to go back there. This is a person you care about. And so I think that Hemingway did it the way it would happen in a real world. That'd be a cool ending. Like I said, I would hope it's more that ending as opposed to this perpetual cycle that then continues on for the next 15, 20 years of their lives, where, you know, he continues in this friend zone and kind of lives vicariously through that, but has to deal with those ups and downs that we talked about of that relationship. Because in the end, Jake, I mean, really comes off as a kind of a sympathetic character. You feel for him, you know, and you feel for the struggles that he's going through. And I think on you know, he comes off as probably the most like the character that you want to see the good things happen to. I think out of all the characters in the book, he's the one that you sympathize with. And
you do see him when he comes back that day he spends with Brett. They are still drinking a lot, but they're drinking a much lower alcohol content.
Yeah.
And she keeps saying, don't get drunk. And he says, I'm not. I'm drinking this because I enjoy it.
Right.
And you kind of hope, at least I hope, is he picking up on the counts? You know, I just had a 7 days of debauchery. And now I've learned that's not life. That's not real. That's not how it works. Yeah. That wasn't enjoyable in the end. I kind of hope, I certainly have empathy and sympathy for Jake, but in rereading the book, I feel bad for Robert Cohn, but I'm frustrated with him that he doesn't know better. That you picked the wrong group of friends. You could find a group of friends that wouldn't be disrespectful, that you could have a mutual respect relationship with. This ain't them.
A lot of it was of his own making. That's what I feel. A lot of his situation was of his own making.
Right.
And I think a lot of groups have that person in their group that is in the group, and maybe they're not the most popular person in the group, but I hate to say it, but like growing up, especially when you're younger, you look to have that person who's kind of taking the blows for everyone else to some
True.
Literally in Robert Cohn's case. But in his case, he learned how to give out blows physically, but never learned how to handle it emotionally.
Yes. And, right. Because he ends up crying. Yeah. He beats people up and ends up, he's the one crying.
Yes. And as an adult, you start to recognize that is not a healthy thing. I hope people recognize that. Maybe not everyone does, and you start going, well, maybe that's not the way. Maybe what Jake is learning at the end is what you would hope the group would learn about Robert Cohn, is that I can only put out what I can put out. And what's coming back to me is just out of my control at this point, with Brett and with Robert and with Bill or with whomever. I was wondering, you had mentioned that you felt, I was going to say Jeff, you had said this, but obviously there's two Jeff. Jeff, you had said that you felt that Jake was at the end kind of the one you wanted something good to happen for, that he was sympathetic. And I'm wondering if you think that because of the person he's becoming or became or what you saw, or is some of that inspired because you know that for the rest of his life he's going to be physically impaired and somewhat unable to have a complete relationship that he would like to have?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of it is that, because I feel like, you know, as you read through it and you see this guy and you see, as we talked about, he's the ultimate friend, but he drinks to mask all of those issues and problems inside. Like I said, it felt like he was starting to come to be okay with that. I guess that's the thing we hope for almost everybody, is that you become okay with who you are and what you are. And so you would like to see him evolve into a state where he is okay with that, he's able to enjoy a drink without having to drink to, hide and mask, or escape. And he's able to find happiness, I guess, and happiness on a sustained level as well, and not just something that kind of flies in and out of his life on an unfulfilled happiness, really, when you're talking about his relationship with her. But it's something, so that's what I would say, is that that's what I would look for, is he's suffered a lot. It would be neat, I think we generally, most people that are fairly optimistic, kind of feel that way about most people, is you want to see people have good in their life, and
we want the sun to rise.
We want the sun to rise. And I said, like, for me in this story, he's the guy that I latched onto, that, like, I'd really like to see him catch a break here, and you feel like he's a war veteran, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of this is not of his own doing. It came about as a result of war injuries and everything else. And he's kind of had this lost, I don't know how long, I probably could do the math, but how long he's been on this pathway of trying to kind of find himself, or just escape, I guess, and it's obviously been several years. It would be nice to see, as he enters that next stage of his life, to kind of find some joy and fulfillment.
Because he mentions how many things he's tried. I mean, he talks about going to his church and his faith, and went to the Catholic Church for help. How do I deal with this injury and this frustration? And the quote, I think he says, the Catholic Church had an awfully good way of handling all that. Good advice, anyway, not to think about it. Mm-hmm. Oh, swell advice. Try and take it sometime. Try and take it. Right. Yeah, that's not going to be a solution. Not to have sexual desire, not to live a life without love. And if sexual love is a shallow part of love, it's also a part of love, so he can't ignore it. That's already been given advice to him years ago. And so he's going to have to find another path forward. And I like to read Isn't It Pretty to Think So as a transition to a new part of his life, where those balances, I think you said the word balance.
Yeah, he gets a balance. Yeah.
Can I ask a little bit less deep, but I had mentioned before that I thought of Dustin Hoffman for Robert Cohen. Who do you imagine as our lead characters, Jacob, Barnes, and Brett?
Oh, what a great question.
That is a good question.
I picture a 30-ish year old George Clooney as Jake, because I think he has to have a sexuality about him so that you're more frustrated.
I was thinking like a Brad Pitt type of guy, that's a super handsome guy, but very masculine, but at the same point is super vulnerable.
He's got to be able to deliver those one-liners that Jake does over and over again throughout the story.
I really enjoyed, what was the movie that he just won the Oscar for? Like that model of him, like, I feel like that, where he's got he's got kind of both sides to it.
Oh, the one with Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of that. Yeah, once upon a So, but I think that would be good, and I think I'm blanking on her name on the Brett one, but the name will come to me at some point, but. Obviously it has to be it kind of that. What's her? She's in the movies that are. She plays one of the roles in the. I'm blanking totally on it right now, so maybe it'll come to me. Maybe you guys it'll trigger that.
Does she have curves like the hull of a racing yacht?
I'm gonna Google that right. Curves of a racing yacht and see what happens. No, let me see what it is. It's you guys figure it. You talk about who you like here, and I'm gonna see if I can figure out who it is.
Well, I think I really like George Clooney as that main character. I was thinking Christina Hendricks. She's in Mad Men, and she plays a bit character in the movie Drive, which is where I kind of think of her as that range. But she's clearly very powerful in her own right, and very aware of her effect on men in those films and those shows. And that's kind of who I imagined as I was reading along.
There's several lines where Brett walks through Spain in particular, but it happens in Paris as well, where the women kind of cross their arms or give her an unapproving look. But then Jake also adds, but they couldn't look away. And it's got to have that compelling nature where there's an instant jealousy and I can't take my eyes off this woman as she walks by, because how often do I get to see a person that looks like that? And she's got to have that power, but also be able to play off that vulnerability, that all of that is just maybe even an illusion because there's this broken human being inside there.
But it almost felt like, she seems like in the book, her character is very aware of her power, but almost wishes she didn't have it anymore, as if it would have died with her husband.
Yeah.
And then she wouldn't have to do all these things or behave this way because she wouldn't have this power over people.
Jake
But
even
she's always
says,
in charge.
Jake says to her after Robert, he's drooling and his eyes are bulging out. He says, well, you got another one there. And she just kind of shrugs it off as so like, yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't know till now.
Mm-hmm.
So I found it. Her name's Allison Sudol, and she was in the Fantastic Beasts series. She plays Queenie. I don't know if you guys have seen those.
Yeah.
But she plays a character that's straight out of kind of that time frame, and just like she in my mind kind of epitomizes that individual, because she's very beautiful, and she's got kind of that I don't know, almost kind of that naive, like doesn't maybe realize the power that she has on men, even though I think Brett definitely understands the power that she has, but that kind of character.
So all those Hollywood producers out there thinking about putting this together, the movie was made once some time ago and they left out all the sexuality, so it's a disaster. When you're looking to put this thing together and you're looking for content experts, you come no farther than I Like Beer, the book talk, where Jeff, and Ryan are waiting for you. And we'll help you out. And if that never happens, well, isn't it pretty to think so?
Yes.
Thank you for joining us for I Like Beer, the book talk. Jeff, and Ryan, and we'll see you in a month with a new book.
Cheers.
Cheers.